The nomination hearings, confirmation hearings of Brett Kavanaugh for the U.S. Supreme Court were front and center in Washington and the nation this week. But where do we go from here? And what was it that we just saw this past week? Rory Little, UC Hastings professor of law and former federal prosecutor. What were these hearings about?
Well, these hearings were not about whether we were going to confirm Justice Kavanaugh. Unless he made some mistake, he was going to be confirmed. He will now be confirmed, I think, by a straight party vote. You might even see some Democratic senators voting for him. But you sure saw a lot of frustration about Merrick Garland not being on the Supreme Court and never even getting a hearing. That
was under the Obama administration, where the Republicans basically said we wouldn't even consider the nominee.
Right.
But Brett Kavanaugh, how did he come off, in your opinion?
I thought Kavanaugh came off kind of awkward in some places. He certainly got caught in some contradictions with some things he might have said 12 and 15 years ago.
Kamala Harris.
Well, Kamala Harris, I thought, scored some big points when she asked, you know, what's a regulation that regulates a man's body? And Kavanaugh said, gee, I can't think of any. I think that was a good point.
Well, then how much of these hearings is about Kavanaugh? Oh, and Dianne Feinstein, how did she come across?
Feinstein is, you know, her seniority was very effective, and Grassley was consulting with her.
All right. Now, as far as these hearings go, how much of this is about judicial temperament and whether this gentleman is qualified to sit on the Supreme Court, and how much of this is politics and gotcha and a protest against Donald Trump?
Well, it's a protest. I mean, and we saw the protesters. We saw an organized, the first time we've ever seen that, an organized series of people, one by one, standing up to disrupt the hearings. I mean, even at 9 o'clock at night, there were people in there standing up and yelling. It was a trial by ordeal, though, for the justice. I mean, what do? We put a guy up there. He can't really say very much, and we make him sit for 12 hours and see if he cracks or if he faints.
Okay, so he does the 12 hours. It's almost like a reality show, which we are so critical of in the administration in America today. And yet we have a new reality show for this past week in Washington.
Yeah, you know, the only difference is once he's confirmed, you can't fire him.
Well, let's go ahead on that, because what are we going to be seeing in the week to come, and what effect do you see these hearings have on both the American public and on this process?
Well, the public will be interesting to see what the midterms bring. I think a lot of people here were just shooting for the midterms. I think they'll have a committee vote in about a week, and they will have a floor vote and for confirmation before October 1st. The term of the Supreme Court starts on October 1st. They want him in that chair. It's also perhaps not a coincidence that President Trump needs 9 justices up there in case something happens that gets to the Supreme Court against President Trump. So there's some thinking that this was the reason they rushed it, was to make sure he's got his 9th justice up there.
Okay, so do we have like the midterm elections versus the beginning of the Supreme Court on the race for getting him in?
Well, the race, you know, the October 1st deadline is the sort of the theory, but I think the reality is they want this in before the midterm so that they can all go home and campaign. In some sense, if there was anything wrong here, they wanted it to be fading in the memory.
There's often said that the debate is, will the court go one way or the other? And when I talk to federal judges, they always say that's really overplayed. Judges take every case as it comes in. What effect do you see this having on the Supreme Court? Will it really have an effect?
You know, there isn't any doubt, I think, that Kavanaugh will make the difference on some cases. There are some cases where Kennedy was the 5th vote, and now Kavanaugh is replacing Kennedy. He's not the same as Kennedy. He's more conservative, we think, on the death penalty. He's more conservative, again, we think, on abortion, or at least on Roe versus Wade. He may make the difference in some of these issues. On the 4th Amendment, he may be more conservative. We don't really know, and these hearings didn't tell us anything about that.
Well, once again, democracy in action in the new age of Twitter and Trump. Rory Little, I want to thank you for joining us this morning. Thanks. And we want to take the lens back and even go behind the scenes. While everybody's watching the Kavanaugh hearings, what is the state of the federal judiciary in the 2 years near that Donald Trump has been in?
Well, you have to admit that Donald Trump has now achieved more in the federal judiciary than any president in history. He has successfully had nominated and confirmed many more district court judges, federal judges in the trial court, and appellate judges. And he's going to have 2 Supreme Court appointments. That's more than anyone's ever done in that period of time. And those people are all committed to some version of a conservative agenda. The anonymous op-ed in the New York Times was right. They are achieving a certain agenda despite whatever craziness they see in the president.
how have they been able to advance this judiciary? Because Donald Trump is not exactly seen as a brilliant tactician. How has he been able to remake the federal judiciary this quickly?
Well, Don McGahn, the White House counsel, has made this his priority. He has been pushing it, and Jeff Sessions has been pushing it. Some of the judges that were confirmed right away were from North Carolina.
What effect will it have on policing, civil rights, these issues that we see every day on the news? Even border, even immigration. What effect does a Trump-dominated judiciary have? Well,
you're going to see a lot of federal cases in the next couple of years filed about immigration, filed about police brutality, filed about qualified immunity. That is, when can you get damages from a law enforcement official for having violated somebody's rights? Even if they violate their rights, they have immunity in some cases. These are big judicial doctrines that are on the table, and the trial judges are the ones that normally set these things up. It's not the Supreme Court.
Who's picking the judges? Is it Trump or is it the staff?
It's not Trump. Well, he's ceded this to some extent to the Federalist Society, which is a very conservative group that's been around for 30 years, and they've been slowly implementing their judicial vision in the Republican Party. And Leonard Leo, who's the head of the Federalist Society, is a private person, has been asked to submit the list of judges.
I'm going to go back to the idea of his effectiveness. There were periods when both George Bush and Barack Obama had green lights.
Yeah.
And yet they could not make the move. Why is it? Were there an unusual amount of vacancies, or what made the field so wide for him?
Well, you know, a lot of people think that this is the biggest mistake Obama made, was not using that first 2-year period to just put people on the courts. That wasn't his priority. That's a criticism everyone knows about. When Trump came in and put people in the Attorney General's position, White House counsel, they had that as their marching orders. Put judges on. Not from the president, not marching orders from him, marching orders from the Republican Party.
We have the judges, but there's also the prosecutors. And here in Northern California, we've got a new one on the nominee. Is he a Trumpite? What the name is Anderson?
Dave Anderson. Dave Anderson is not, I don't think, a Trump follower in some sense. He's actually a very stable and steady and smart guy. He clerked for, I believe, Justice Rehnquist on the Supreme Court.
So are we seeing that with other federal prosecutors? I mean, it's one thing you have the judicial, but are we having sort of this inquisitional type prosecutors come in, or are they balanced?
You know, there are 93 U.S. attorneys around the country, and frankly, it's always a mixed bag. Some are very political, and some are just local, respected prosecutors, like Dave Anderson in this district. The fellow who's in Sacramento, same thing, local, well-respected, long career. I don't think that's where you're seeing the Trump influence. I think you're going to see that more on the judicial side. And then the midterm elections are going to decide, you know, if the House takes over, if it's Democrats, you're going to see impeachment hearings.
And that's going to be a whole new chapter that you're going to be dragged in on as well. Rory Little, UC Law professor, former prosecutor, state of the federal judiciary, and